Ladies and gentlemen, attendees and participants, welcome to the June 13th meeting of the City of Tampa Variance Review Board. From my left, the members of the board are
Una Johnson,
Sam Decker.
Brett Feldman.
Aaron Murphy.
Also in attendance this evening from Legal, Susan Johnson-Velez. From Development Coordination, Jane Madu and Mary Tavares. From Natural Resources, Stephen Eister. There are some procedural rules we need you to follow. When your case number and petitioner's name are called, please approach the podium. When you approach the podium, please state your name, your address, and confirm that you have been sworn in. The petitioner or its agent will have 10 minutes to make a presentation. All other persons or participants wishing to speak will have 3 minutes. The petitioner will have an additional 5 minutes for rebuttal if needed. The time periods as stated will be kept by the board. Any information such as pictures or plans that have not been previously submitted as part of the petition and that you intend to submit for consideration in support of your petition must be individually presented and accepted by the board. After acceptance by the board, you must submit the item to staff for it to be entered and made part of the permanent record. The board bases its decision on competent and substantial evidence which is submitted and which meets the criteria required by the city's City Code of Ordinances. Please be sure to clearly state your hardship criteria during your presentation. A majority of the board is needed to approve your variance. The variance granted by the board will only be for what is shown on the site plan and will be in compliance with any terms or conditions stated by the board. All other city codes must be met. If the case is approved, your variance will expire 2 years from the date of decision. If your case is continued, it will either be continued to next month's VRB board agenda or to the next available position on an upcoming VRB board agenda. If the case is denied, you may wish to have the Variance Review Board's decision appealed by the City Council. You must file a petition for review of the board's decision within 14 days of the board's written decision. You will not be able to pull any permits until the 14-day review period has passed. Your cooperation in ensuring that this meeting is run smoothly is greatly appreciated. Can I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the May 9th Variance Review Board meeting?
I approve minutes from May 9th Variance Review Board meeting.
Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? The meeting minutes are approved. At this time, I will ask legal staff to confirm whether there are any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, I'd ask if any members of the board have had any ex parte communications with respect to any item on the agenda for this evening. Seeing none, I would now ask if any members of the board have any conflicts of interest with respect to any matters on the agenda this evening.
I do conduct business with the applicant for VRB case 23-25, but that will not affect my ability to be impartial on the case.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Are there any changes to the agenda that staff wishes to make this evening?
No, however, I noticed that the applicant for VRB 2325 is not here. He had sent an email earlier yesterday saying he might continue the application, but I haven't received any update from him, and he's not here tonight, so that might need to be continued.
Madam Chair, why don't we just move that to the end of the agenda this evening, and
Makes
we'll,
sense to me.
if we need to continue it at that point, we can do that.
Do I have a motion to move case VRB 2325 to the end of the agenda?
I'll move to move case VRB 2325 to the end of the agenda tonight.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. At this time, I would ask a staff member to conduct the swearing in. Anyone who could potentially speak this evening on any of the applications should stand to be sworn at this time.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give today is the truth and nothing but the truth?
All right. Ms. Madu, if you could introduce the first case.
Good evening, everyone. The first case before the board tonight is VRB 2334. This is addressed at 2912 West Bay Vista Avenue. The property owner is Rudy van de Helden, and the zoning, it's zoned RS 60 residential single family. The variance request before the board tonight is to remove 2 grand trees to construct a new single-family residence. The code section in reference is section 27-284.2.5 that has the requirements for the permission of the removal of a grand tree. This is a topographical survey that the applicant provided, showing the subject property, the house that was existing previously on this property, and the lot coverage. This is an interior lot in the South Tampa Planning District. These are the proposed floor plans for the new construction. It is a 2-story house. They have first floor plans on the second floor. This is the site plan showing the house as the previously existing home, and the tree, the 2 trees in question, an elm tree to the east of the property and the oak tree to the north of the property. This is the proposed site plan. This is the plan that the applicant would like to move forward with, and as such, they're requesting for the removal of the 2 grand trees. This is the first alternative site plan that the applicant provided, showing that they have moved the setbacks, they have reconfigured the setbacks for the proposed house. And this is the second alternative site plan that they provided, using a nearby floor plan. This was reviewed by Natural Resources and found inconsistent with technical standards and code. They have provided, staff has provided a memo that was included in the staff report. This was reviewed by Transportation and found consistent, reviewed by Right-of-Way and found consistent, reviewed by Zoning and found inconsistent with code, based off of the review of Natural Resources. Zoning staff believes that the proposed design and site plan can be reconfigured to accommodate the preservation of the trees. We received no letters of objection or support for this variance request. These are the pictures that the applicant has provided showing the 2 trees in question. In the determination of the variance request before you, the board shall consider section 27-84.2.5 as the criteria for the approval or denial of a grand tree removal. If you have any questions, staff will be available.
All right, is the applicant here?
Mr. Decker, before we get started, I would like to put on the record, I had not had a chance to completely review the new agenda this morning. I have had some minimal ex parte communications on this with regards whether or not he would need a variance or not, and I advised him he would, but I can be impartial and all of that wonderful stuff, so I just wanted to put that on the official record.
Okay, and just legal, are you comfortable with?
That's fine. I mean, he's not
Okay.
saying he has a conflict. He just has had communications outside of this hearing.
All right.
And so he's disclosed them and the substance of the communications. So.
Appreciate that. All right, applicant, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Jamie Mayer of the law firm Hill Ward Henderson, representing the applicant, 101 East Kennedy Boulevard, Suite 3700, and I have been sworn. If I could just, I don't see a mouse, so yes, thank you. And will I have to say, to advance this?
This is a drawer right there.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Oh, great, thank you. Okay. As staff explained, this is a request to remove 2 grand trees at property located at 2912 West Bay Vista Avenue. The applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Bresnahan, want to build a new home for themselves on this property in accordance with the RS60 zoning district dimensions and the size of the lot. So as you can see from the aerial and from the property appraiser's drawing, this site is the most heavily treed lot on this street, and it's also an oversized lot because it's 100 feet in width where the neighborhood was platted at 50. So So the first tree to propose to be removed is rated C7, and according to the arborist report prepared by Mr. Ricky Pederica, which is in the record, this is a live oak. It is very centrally located to the lot, and I do have a few more pictures to orient you to where it is in the lot. Its scaffold limbs preclude structures above 27 feet in a large central portion of the site, where the code permits 35 feet, which is 2 stories. So the site is a little bit in disrepair, but as you can see, the tree is up against the house here, if you can see my mouse. And then you can see here how its canopy takes up a pretty large part of this square lot. So it's in the center of the lot, and it takes up a pretty large part of the buildable area. And here's another angle. This tree in the foreground is not the tree proposed under this variance. It's back here, and you can see again how these limbs reach over the existing house, which has a very oddly sloped roof and an irregular 1.5 story design because it precludes the full 2 stories in its current location. The other tree proposed to be removed is also rated C7. It's an elm. It's toward the east of the site, and its root system, its critical root zone, and its canopy extend into the permitted building envelope, which is permitted by right in the zoning district, and also extend, as you'll see in a moment, into the proposed building footprint. So the proposed home is just over 4,000 square feet in size and 2 stories. This is in line with the RS60 zoning district, and it's also in line with houses that have been built on this street since 2000. They range from 2 to 3 stories, and they are typically 4,000 to 6,000 square feet. As you can see in this drawing, and I know you've just seen it, but I would like to explain the red line is the permitted by right buildable envelope. The blue line shows where the structure could be shifted with a design exception, and the darker yellow squares around the proposed removal trees are the critical root zones. And so you can see how the critical root zones are both within the permitted by right building envelope and also within the actual footprint of the proposed structure itself. So I just want to reiterate the code standard before you. The code assesses a proposed structure. It does not assess any possible potential structure that could be built on a site. It asks, when a proposed structure conflicts with a tree, can that structure be reasonably reconfigured to save the given tree? And reasonable reconfiguration is not a subjective question. It is a defined term in the code, and it is an objective standard. Grand tree removals are permitted if, quote, the proposed building footprint. Again, this is not any possible building footprint that could be on the property, but the one that has been proposed, which would render the tree hazardous. If the applicant demonstrates that there is no other reasonable reconfiguration, then the tree can be removed. Natural Resources staff provided in the memorandum a proposed reconfiguration which would fail the reasonable reconfiguration standard. I'll get into that a little bit more in a second here, but this is an entirely different footprint. It is an entirely different structure. This is not a reconfiguration. This is a hypothetical. This is an idea of what could be built on the site, but it has got nothing to do with the structure that's been proposed, and therefore it fails that narrow code standard, which asks, can the structure be reconfigured within certain defined parameters? And those parameters include a reasonable reconfiguration is one that does not adjust the structure more than allowed by a design exception. It does not change the number of stories proposed. It does not adversely alter the internal flow or function of the proposed structure. It does, when feasible, allow you to encroach up to the critical root zone. But in this case, as you've seen, it's not a question of up to the critical root zone, as the critical root zone is within the proposed building footprint already, so that is not at play in this case. We went through the reasonable reconfiguration standard required analysis. The reasonable alternative could not preserve the tree, and I'll show that again in a moment. It was shown in staff's presentation, and I'll explain why. The other alternatives, including Natural Resources alternative and the other alternative explored by the applicant, proved unreasonable under the standard, and so are not viable options. The shifting allowed in a design exception would not provide enough setback relief to preserve the trees. And the proposed alterations that were able to save the trees resulted in either a significant reduction to the floor area, a total redesign of the structure, and an adverse impact to the flow and function. This was the first reconfiguration submitted by the applicant, which, as you can see, that blue line, which is where you're allowed to shift pursuant to the design exceptions in the code, it's not enough to save the trees. So although this would be deemed reasonable under the code, it's not enough to preserve the trees, and so it's not really a viable alternative. The second reconfiguration fails the standard, similar to the natural resources proposed reconfiguration. It's a total loss of the flow and function because it's a completely different house. It also represents a 12% reduction in the floor area, and it's shifted far more than would be allowed by a design exception. Again, this is not a viable alternative. So I just want to end with describing the considerations before the board in a grand tree variance case. The question is, what is the impact of the proposed structure on the tree? You've seen the impact is the critical root zone, the canopy, and Mr. Pederica is here who can provide more technical answers to questions about the tree's conditions themselves. Whether the proposed structure can be reasonably reconfigured, as that term is narrowly defined in the code, and you've seen that it cannot. Similarly, whether reduction of setbacks would allow relocation of the structure to preserve the tree. Just reducing setbacks alone did not produce that result. Whether alternative construction methods could preserve the tree up to the root zone. Again, the root zone is within the buildable footprint, so that's not an option. And the board has to weigh whether the reduction in value and use when compared to the condition of the tree warrants in favor in one direction or the other. And these trees being rated C7 are only marginally better than a C9 tree, which could be removed without a variance. When you weigh the reduction in value and use of the home with some of these total redesigns, it points in favor of the proposed structure as is and the removal of the tree. So we are here for questions, and we respectfully request your approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak in favor or against this application? All right. So you have 3 minutes, and just a reminder to state your name, address, and confirm that you've been sworn.
Hi, my name is Carol Ann Bennett. I am one of the founding members of TTAG, and I have been sworn. At the city council meeting last Thursday, an applicant submitted
You
a
could just state
revised
your
site.
address too.
4116 West Santiago Street, Tampa, Florida.
Thank you.
At the city council meeting last Thursday, an applicant submitted a revised site plan that staff did not have opportunity to formally review and respond to because it was submitted after the deadline. You have the same issue here. On April 27th, Forester Stephen Eister listed what was missing and what was wrong with the submitted plans. When the city issued its official final staff report, none of those things had been corrected. So like city council, you must vote only on what is in the final official report. There is no accurate tree survey, which is required for a complete evaluation by staff and you. The grand live oak cannot be located on the regular survey. The proposed site plan does not have the required tree survey overlay. The submitted reconfigurations have the wrong setback reductions. The front should be 18.75 feet, not 22.5 feet, and the rear should be 12 feet, not 18 feet. The architect can shift the east and west. The architect can shift the east and the west parts of the house forward more than 6 feet and have the tree in a front courtyard. They can shift the entire house backwards by 8 feet, which would put the new house farther away from the tree than the existing house. With the reduction of setbacks that is automatically allowed, the total available area for the first and second floor is 13,089 square feet. I have no doubt a good architect can fit a very nice 4,300 square foot, 2-story house within the 13,890 square feet, 89 square feet available to them, and save both grand trees. The architect could also look at the designs to shift the driveway from the east side to the west side to work better with the lot. The first floor of the proposed house is actually smaller than the first floor of the existing house. They could look into using existing footer areas of the existing smaller house to decrease the impact. What they might not be able to do is fit a large pool and spa in the backyard. And if you look at the drawings, you will see that as the plan. The lack of a large pool is not grounds for a variance to remove 2 grand trees. The applicant has failed to provide correct and necessary documentation that is required to justify a variance. They have not shown reasonable reconfiguration. They have not used the reduction of setbacks to preserve the trees. In fact, they have failed all the Section 27 code criteria for variance to remove a grand tree. Natural resources found it inconsistent and zoning found it inconsistent. Please deny this variance. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Lorraine Perino. I'm the president of the Tampa Tree Advocacy Group. I live at 604 Ontario Avenue. The recently released 2021 tree canopy and urban forest analysis
could just
sadly
confirm that you've
informs
been
us that
sworn.
Tampa's tree canopy decreased from a healthy 32% in 2016 to a marginal 26% in 2021. A
Could you
decline
just
of
quickly
4%
confirm that you've been sworn? Sorry, I just want to make sure we're checking all the boxes. If you could just confirm that you've been sworn in?
Yes.
Okay.
Is my time still going? I'm going to start over.
Yep.
The recently released 2021 tree canopy and urban forest analysis sadly informs us that Tampa's tree canopy decreased from a healthy 32% in 2016 to a marginal 26% in 2021, a decline of 4% in just 5 years. This study, spanning the years 2016 to 2021, doesn't encompass the ongoing loss of tree canopy from 2022 to the present day. The study informs us that the number of trees Tampa has lost can be compared to the equivalent of 4 areas the size of Davis Island. A closer analysis shows that Tampa has lost 7% of its tree canopy since 2016 and 13% since 1995. South Tampa alone, where the applicant wants to remove 2 grand trees, has lost an astonishing 18% of its trees, more than any other area in Tampa. Tampa's remaining old-growth grand trees should be considered to be as valuable a resource as gold, a commodity to be protected and preserved, not destroyed. It takes 50 years for a tree to reach grand status, yet Tampa continues to take these giants for granted by destroying them. The applicant erroneously asserts that the house cannot be reasonably reconfigured. However, this lot contains a large buildable area of 7,000 square feet, more than adequate for the size house they want to build. The city has created an alternative reasonable reconfiguration design which should be utilized to preserve these 2 grand trees. Moving the driveway, using the existing footers, and making the second floor larger than the first could preserve these 2 grand trees for generations to come. Reasonable reconfiguration became part of Tampa's tree ordinance in 2019 because Tampa was using too many grand trees outside of the TRZ. Nonetheless, even with reasonable reconfiguration, with petitions to the VRB, Tampa continues to lose too many grand trees on residential lots. The applicants also erroneously assert that both trees are rated C7 and not high-quality trees. To the contrary, live oaks are considered to be the most valuable trees in the entire state of Florida. The workhorses of the urban forest, giant oxygen pumping stations, producing the very oxygen necessary for all life. They store the carbon dioxide polluting Tampa's air. They store huge amounts of water, mitigating street flooding, which is so prevalent in a coastal high hazard area like Bayshore Boulevard. They also provide a much-needed habitat for Florida's native wildlife. A tree with a C7 rating is considered to be a healthy and preservation quality tree. The tree canopies of Miami-Dade and Broward decreased to the teens before those counties implemented drastic measures to restore them. Miami-Dade's 2016 Million Trees Miami has yet to reach its goal of 30% tree canopy by 2020, proving that a city cannot plant its way out of a decimated tree canopy. Tampa should learn from these counties by acting now to preserve its old-growth trees. Natural Resources and Zoning have found this plan to be inconsistent. The VRB must also find it inconsistent. Tampa must begin to take the dramatic decline of its tree canopy seriously if its residents are to safely weather the nearly unbearable heat index of summer and the increasing threat of sea level rise. Please vote to preserve these 2 grand trees. Thank you.
Good evening. Allison Date, 2403 West Chicago, and I have been sworn in. I'm going to talk a little bit about oxygen too. 70% of atmospheric oxygen is generated by oceanic plankton. Sylvia Earle, one of my heroes, an oceanographer who has established over 130 marine reserves, made this comment. With no blue, there's no green, and no us either. Trees also contribute to our oxygen supply. A large mature tree, 260 pounds a year, enough for a family of 4. Do we have enough of those trees already? I mean, walking here with all these skyscrapers we have now, I don't think we have enough trees for all the people in the city to give them fresh air every year. So trees, with fewer trees, there's reduced oxygen and reduced quality of life. For this reason, I'm speaking today for the 2 grand trees that live on this parcel of land with adequate space to create a design to protect them. The city arborist, in his review, offered a simple design change, and the second alternative plan submitted by the builder actually provided tree protection. So it is possible to save these 2 trees. Why is the builder not requesting setbacks? And I don't understand how all that works, but it seems like that could be possible to make this plan work instead of asking for a variance to remove 2 very precious trees. Please vote no on this variance so you send the message that Tampa is serious about saving their canopy, especially in South Tampa with its great loss of trees. And this has also been stated as one of the goals of the mayor, that we're going to not reduce the canopy anymore. So it's important that we take that into consideration. If people don't want to loss of trees, don't want to accommodate healthy grand trees, they shouldn't purchase a lot that has them. Tampa needs these 2 trees. Remember, with fewer trees, there's reduced oxygen and reduced quality of life. Thank you very much.
Right, is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this application? Right, seeing none, are there any questions? If you could just confirm your name, address.
John R. Cannon, 2911 West Bay Vista Avenue, Tampa, Florida. I have been sworn in. I'm here first and foremost as a neighbor. Have been a neighbor on Bay Vista for 32 years, lived across the street from the property, and have seen a lot of changes over the years. I also am an activist as far as just neighborhood spirit, fellowship, getting to know your neighbors. I'm the old timer there, and made it a point to walk around the block yesterday and just talk to different neighbors to find out what their feelings were about the tree and the trees in question. I am also the sellers and the family's agent. Need to bring that to the forefront. And it would be an honor to sell this property as a single-family development for single-family home. That would be the wishes of the deceased, Tony and Dennis, God rest their hearts and their souls. But they would love the property to be redeveloped, the house torn down, redeveloped the way it is projected to be. The neighbors don't have any issues with the plans for the house, and would love to welcome a new family into the neighborhood, which has seen a lot of changes over 32 years since I've been there. And I felt it was important as a sales agent as well to get their feeling on whether or not they had any objections to the removal of the trees. And if they did, to voice their opinion here today, and was assured that nobody would. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I just hope that the decision is made, and I know that it'll be in the best interest of Tony and Dennis, the deceased. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak on this application? Right. Seeing none, I'm going to open it up for board questions.
I have a couple. Ms. Johnson-Velez, on what can we rely in terms of the survey that's been presented to us, in terms of the information in our packet? Is there sufficient information for us to move forward with the decision this evening?
Well, I think that's a question for staff. I mean, it's not a legal question.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's start there. And I do have some questions for Mr. Eister, so I guess we can flip them, and we'll come back.
So Stephen Eister, Natural Resources, I have been sworn in. As far as the survey goes, we always request a complete survey. The plan Ricky provided with the reasonable reconfigurations shows the 2 grand trees and their locations. So I think it is reviewable.
Okay.
We'd like to have the complete survey with all the trees on it on record. So that's why that initial comment is there.
Got it.
Especially when it's the grand tree that we're looking at.
Good. Okay. While you're there,
Yes.
do you agree with the ratings that Mr. Pederica provided in his report, the tree ratings of C7 for both trees?
Yes, I do. I went and just double checked them. Typically, so Ricky has gone through an additional training with the city of Tampa, with our codes and standards. So I just like to double check if I'm gonna be talking about the trees. I do like to go look at them, but I agree with the ratings Ricky provided.
Okay. The oak appears pretty central in the lot. Is it just outside of the automatic box?
So the automatic box is only for smaller lots.
Okay.
So like your 50
it
by
doesn't count
100s.
for
This lot is 100 by 105.
okay.
So it's
So
RS6.
there's no box?
There's no box.
Okay. All right. Well, that answers the question of why it isn't automatically removed. Okay. Anybody else have questions for Mr. Eister before?
I do. One of the audience members presented us with a plan. I don't know if you got that too, with revised setbacks. Are these correct? Have we been presented with the correct information in terms of setbacks? It's very different from what was in our packet.
So when you're preserving grand trees, like the code does mention a DE1 shift for reasonable reconfiguration. There's another portion in the code that talks about setback reductions if you're preserving grand trees. So I like to explore those two. Since they are granted by right, there's no design exception, there's no anything else that needs to be applied for, and that is correct. So they would get, it's in my memo, a 25% reduction in the front, a 1 foot in the side, 40% in the rear, and then a 10% increase in height by right if they preserve a grand tree.
So just to confirm, the setbacks that you drew on here are that 40% in the rear, 1 foot
Yeah,
on either
whoever
side? And
submitted this to you. I
Oh.
didn't do this.
you're right, sorry. Yep, okay.
Yeah, I just, supplied what it would be if they did preserve a grand tree.
Got it, okay.
Clearly, if they don't preserve it, they don't get the reductions, kind of like an incentive.
Okay.
And those, just so we're clear, those reductions are automatic as of right. They don't even have to come here to ask for it,
Correct.
right? But they could, if they wanted to, come here, ask for a reduction in setback, and in order to preserve that grand tree, that's something we have the ability to do, right?
Correct.
Okay. I have questions, not for you, Mr. Eister. I have some questions for the applicant. Is it Ms. Corbett?
Miss Mayor.
Oh, sorry.
Jamie is fine, though.
Okay, sorry, we just have,
No, yes, yeah. I'm doing it.
okay. Well, thanks. So, on that note, have you considered how setbacks, the use of setbacks and applying for a setback reduction would impact the request to remove the trees? Have you considered whether you could seek a setback that would save the trees?
So, and that was part of the reasonable reconfiguration analysis, because as Mr. Eister and also Ricky Pederica explored, yes, there's the options for a design exception, which is not enough to save the tree. There's also the footnote in the general code related to setbacks for a grand tree, but the question that is before you is the reasonable reconfiguration standard. So when this house was designed, that becomes the baseline according to the code. It's the proposed footprint. So it's not so much, I mean, if a different house had been proposed, then perhaps that would have been what was done, is just do a more extreme variance if it was a completely different design. Like one of the alternatives that was shown where it's very far down into the rear, that would require a variance. Like an actual setback variance could not be administratively approved. But that's not a reasonable reconfiguration, and that's the code. So I think there's a lot of, it used to be the reasonable use standard, and perhaps that would have been a reasonable use, but that is not the code standard anymore.
Okay.
So that's
Well,
why it's not.
let's explore that, because I'm interested in how this works. Is it your position then that reasonable reconfiguration would not include seeking a variance to reduce the setbacks?
Yes, that is not part of the code standard of reasonable reconfiguration.
Is it your position that if the root zone of a tree is within the buildable zone, that that tree essentially has to come down? Is that the position you're taking?
Not if it could be reasonably reconfigured.
Okay, so let's work off of what we have here. If the original design of the home fills the buildable area of the lot, and a tree's root zone is within the buildable area, is the position that you're saying that, well, you can't reasonably reconfigure because that's the design, that's the baseline?
Yes. Ricky was instrumental in, here, if you will.
Thank you. Ricky Pederica, Dark Moss, 308 7th Avenue. I've been sworn. I would suggest, yes, that the provision of the reasonable reconfiguration, I think, are 3 prongs. And in between the lines of those prongs is that we can propose, or someone can propose, a footprint to the buildable area.
Right. You can build up to the buildable area, that's what it tells us. And so if somebody designs a house that fills the buildable area, in other words, the buildable area is X and the house's footprint is X, and that's the design, then if the root zone invades that buildable area, anything, the tree's coming down, right? That's the position?
Yeah, I think that's, as a design or a design professional consultant, that's how I would interpret this provision.
Okay. Does a reasonable reconfiguration of the home include reducing the size of the structure?
I think it's our assignment to define the internal flow and function and whether that is reduced with a reduced floor area.
Okay, so if we took the exact design of the home and we just shrunk it percentage-wise, each room shrunk by 10%, that's not a reasonable reconfiguration. The flow is exactly the same, it's just smaller.
I think we are at a floor plan analysis at that point as our burden, or the applicant's burden, to say that 10% affects the function of a room or circulation through the building. And we're not there in this case in particular, but relative to this theoretical. In my opinion, we are then being asked to demonstrate that whether the internal flow and function is changed with that 10% reduction.
Okay, and have you considered a reduction of any percentage to determine whether that would impact the flow and function of the design of the property?
Not of the proposed building structure.
Right.
Option 2 was a consideration of a property, I think across the street. I don't know if it was east or west, but it was an attempt to try to take a building within the pattern of the existing street that may actually work, compared to other buildings that obviously wouldn't, from a floor plan and vertical height perspective, and attempt to see if even that would fit with this configuration of trees. And that did not fit without a variance either, or encroachment in the root area. So it was not exactly your analysis, but we couldn't make a building that was within the neighborhood context work that was 12% smaller than the existing footprint.
And if I could also add, again, this is an oversized lot. So again, one of the considerations is weighing the conditions of the trees against a reduction in the use and value of the home. This is a 100-foot lot on a beautiful street. All the houses that have been built since 2000, in a review of the property appraiser, are 4,000 to 6,000 square feet in size, 2 to 3 stories. This is actually on the smaller average side relative to that, and this is on an oversized lot.
Yeah, but that cuts both ways, right? Because an oversized lot means it's a big lot. Are there ways that you can try and save some of these trees, right? I mean, I'm looking at this and I see that oak is pretty central. It's pretty hard to work around the oak. The elm, not so much. I mean, it's pretty far to the edge of the lot, and I understand that the root zone pervades into the buildable lot. But the question I have is any reduction in what you're proposing a reasonable reconfiguration? You're telling me no. The answer is no. The design sets, and again, I'm following your argument. The design sets the baseline. And if the design is 100% of the buildable lot, that's it. There's nothing to be done.
Following up to what Mr. Feldman's saying, if they remove the rear setback to the 12 feet versus the 18 blue line which you have shown, it looks like it takes the elm completely out of the picture.
But then, candidly, on this, you don't have the patio, which is part of the form and function of the house. That's not, that was contemplated in this design to have a functional rear yard like everybody else who, if you look in the aerial, has pools and functional rear yards. So that is a part of the form and function of the house. So if you reduce that, you're completely changing that design, that element of the house. And again, this is an oversized lot, and you're going to have a massive front yard area. It kind of guts the value of the house in that case.
Well, if the oak is coming down, I've looked at the street map, which is part of our packet. There are a lot of houses that sort of move closer to the setback, further away from the front, right? So if you move the house closer to the front, you reduce your front yard setback. You have plenty of backyard setback, so that's an option as well. But let me turn to legal on this now. because I sort of raised a question earlier. What is your interpretation of the applicant's interpretation of the law? Is it accurate to say that, or do you agree with the position that if the baseline is set at 100% of the lot, there's really nothing we can do?
I mean, Susan Johnson Velez Legal, I think, you know, certainly it's up to the board if you want to accept that argument, but I do not think that the board has generally read the code provision as narrowly as the argument that's presented, but it's obviously up to you to determine whether you believe that that's the correct interpretation.
All right.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Or are you
No, go ahead. Absolutely.
So, for the example of the second alternative, it was kind of pushed into that southeast corner, and all alternatives I've seen are kind of in that, you know, south and east orientation. And the original building that's there is more on the west side. And that doesn't seem like the design alternatives used that side to its advantage with all the extra space and the existing kind of footprint that they could be on already disturbed area. Is there a reason why you chose that corner and not the other, or expanded one? I mean, it seems like you're missing an opportunity to expand on that side.
I'll back up a moment and speak to the setback conflict, the blue line issue that has been submitted. I originally read the reasonable reconfiguration provision as referring to Chapter 2760, which has a specific set of provisions for reduction that are lower in South Tampa than, or there's 2 planning districts in the city that have a lower reduction in setback reduction applied. There also exists Chapter 27156, which is the normal zoning code that has these larger setback provisions that have been discussed. I was taking a narrow read of what the reasonable recon was saying, so I just want to say, like, this, I don't know if that difference matters in your question.
Well, I think that is an overall concern about this, is now we weren't, there's more opportunity for you with these new generous setbacks. So I almost feel like there's more opportunity for another kind of site plan to preserve some of these trees. Like, it could be more possible.
Yes, I guess with the narrow read of 2760, we still had an encroachment in the no encroachment zone of the elm, a small corner clip, but a corner clip that was at a point where the construction activities were impacted. Option 1 shifted to the 27156 setback. I don't remember the math, but it's additional 5 more feet, may get us out of that no encroachment zone, but it doesn't get us out of the 20 feet.
Well, if I remember that, the encroachment zone of that oak, on, I think it was option 1, it was a very small area that it was encroached in.
It was.
And I feel like either that could be reconfigured, or it could, you know, be built in a way to preserve those roots. So I'm just trying to figure out a way, like, there's got to be another way to present to us a plan that considers the site, the setbacks, and all the construction alternatives you can do.
So I have a question about option 1, alternative 1, which I understand is a reasonable reconfiguration of the property. Why can we not scoot option 1 to the south a little bit?
That's what we understand.
Okay.
That's kind of my
Ms.
question.
Johnson's
Why
asking
can't
to.
we utilize those and?
Or
I think if we
alternative,
scooted a little south, the oak's the one in the center.
Yeah.
It's still gonna be way in that
Yeah.
red zone.
The-
I don't
Yes.
think, I don't think the oak in the center's got, I mean, it's.
Yes,
it's
the
not
oak is
that big
very
a problem.
problematic.
But we could
and I
probably say
understand
the elm
that.
on the
But,
east side.
but the elm is on the edge of the property, and I understand the position, well, they should have a backyard, but, I mean, we've dealt with pool issues before.
Well, and it would be helpful if we had seen a site plan, using option one, where the building was scooted back just a little bit. I mean, just sort of based on what I'm looking at on my screen, it looks like you would still have quite a bit of a backyard, although it's difficult to tell, right?
I think it's just the nature of the tree. An oak lives 400+ years. I don't take it lightly, to just take one down quickly for something that, is an oversized lot that it looks like you could architecturally fit it in as a feature rather than a nuisance. So,
I mean, we are talking about, at this point, I understand, the elm that's rated C7. I'm not an arborist, we have an arborist here, but I've seen the photos of that and I've been to the site. And again, one of the considerations is weighing the condition of the tree with the reduction in value or use of the home if it's being redesigned. I don't know who would be building a brand new home under the canopies of 2 C7 rated grand trees.
Yeah, and in this consideration, the elm is potentially a feasible adjustment at the 27-156 setback. The oak still results in either a larger than recommended pruning cut for a second story, or a change in form and function to preserve a first story section where, if those limbs are preserved in place.
Do you have more photos of the elm?
I do
put
not.
up?
It's really hard to see without trespassing, frankly. But we can bring the photos up that we have. Let's see.
and I don't have the options in front of me, so forgive me if this is there. Is there an option where you keep the oak and remove the elm?
That
Or
would,
vice-
right.
There was no option
Right.
to that effect.
Well, the oaks that's snap.
Do you,
dead
Right, so
center.
I
do you not
kind of
have
feel like,
photos of the oak, of the elm in your?
They were hard to photograph.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's still better than we have in our report.
Sure,
That's
oh,
good.
okay,
So
yes.
we tried, like I said, it's a little difficult without trespassing on the property, but it's this kind of split tree here on the side, and you can't. So it's over back here. So,
Oh, okay.
but
what's the diameter of that? Is it 20 inches? Is that? I've never seen an elm that big, so.
It says 40, it says 42, but the photo doesn't look that big.
Right.
42 inch,
It's
42 inch.
Wow,
Yeah, it's
okay.
distant.
The photo's far away.
Because, like I say, oaks are used to growing big, hundreds of years. Elms, maybe a fifth of an oak, lifespan. So I would, looking at these pictures, the foliage doesn't look great. I would say it's at the end of its life, but not the oak. It could be, cared for better and maintained and become a feature. But I don't know if that matters in this case, if, we were to, grant removal of the elm and not the oak. Does that help you any in your building?
The oak is definitely the constraining structural tree. The elm is more accommodating is more urban compatible tree architecture by being so, the canopy's already elevated. And when this photograph that is coming, I'm pulling it down, I assessed this in late winter. So it's
Oh, that's
seasonally affected,
Right.
but it looks much more squarely fair now versus a deciduous tree, which we're not so used to in West Central Florida. But it is, I apologize. Do you have, yeah, it's the exact picture in the, in the thing.
hard to get photos.
Yeah, it's hard to get photos of it. And from the street, it's not much better.
Okay, are there any other questions from the board? I have one other question, and this is, I'm not sure which of you would be the more appropriate person to answer it, but someone mentioned the use of existing footers on the house, and one of the factors that we are to consider is utilizing alternative construction methods. Did you all look at that at all? And would that even have an impact on your analysis at this point?
If we had a different footprint that did not go 2 stories at that position, and we didn't go, I wasn't asked to do that analysis because it would require a substantially different layout in order to sort of design to that allowance.
Okay. All right. If there are no other questions from the board, I will close the,
No,
I will
rebuttal.
give the applicant 5 minutes for rebuttal.
I feel like much of what we would have, I think we had a robust discussion, so I don't have too much more to add other than, again, to reiterate the code standard. This floor plan is, as we're reading the code, our baseline. It says the proposed building footprint. If that cannot be reasonably reconfigured, you've seen what the code says about a reasonable reconfiguration, and you've heard our testimony regarding how that affects this structure. We maintain that we have satisfied the criteria for removal of both of these trees and respectfully do request your approval. Thank you.
All right. Now I will close the public hearing, open it up for board discussion or a motion.
So this is interesting enough that I think it requires a little bit of discussion first. I do not agree with the applicant's position that the design sets the baseline in that fashion. I think what that does is it creates an incentive for people to design the biggest possible house they
It
can,
really puts us
and
in
then
a
they get
narrow
to do whatever
corner.
they want, because any reduction in that design is not a reasonable reduction. I don't think that's what the city code was designed to do, and I don't think that's what it's about. But that said, and it's unfortunate that the oak is in the position that it is, but that oak is a problem for the buildable area on this lot. The elm, not so much. So I hate having that oak come down. We walk around and we see the best streets in Tampa are the ones with the big, beautiful canopies of trees. And that is a huge value, but it is not our, we do not have the authority to say we like a tree so we can save it. We have to abide by the rules that the city has given us. And that, to me, that oak impacts the buildable area significantly. And unfortunately, if they want to take it down, I think they have a right to take it down because it impacts the reasonable use of the property.
So I disagree. I think that with a double lot and all these alternatives that are now shown to us as possible, which weren't presented because it's new information, I feel like I want to see some more alternatives before I say, yes, take down that tree. I think, I don't think I was convinced, and I don't want to go off of, this design footprint is it. I don't want this case to go down and be a precedent for others that come.
Well, let's remember that we're not really setting a precedent because each lot and each condition is considered separately. So I don't see it like that,
But if you didn't see alternates and you agree to this, then I feel like we need to see a little bit more thought.
I mean, setting precedent's kind of a slippery slope too. I mean, sure, we can make zigzag, Z-shaped houses all over the place, which are gonna look really funky. And have
some of them look really cool.
but
But that
also
was
have
the
no
old,
flow,
again,
right?
my
I'm just saying.
interpretation, that was the old rules, where we would say, I didn't see a U-shaped lot, I didn't see a U-shaped house that would work here. So,
And then at that point, we could just dismiss every single tree case we see, because we're gonna come up with some crazy shape that's gonna fit and save the tree.
Sure, and,
So I mean,
and
there's
neighborhood
gotta be some
precedent,
happy medium in there somewhere.
you know, there's traditional, then there's a modern, and then there's, you know, one that hasn't been, reconfigured. You know, like, so there's a lot of different things. I believe an architect could make this an awesome house, I have no doubt, and it could be big, and it could be, amazing inside and out.
Well, and if we take the applicant's position that, whatever they present is sort of reasonable, or, is the design that should be on that lot, then, it does encourage applicants to design houses that are in a shape that, takes down the trees that they want to take down.
Sure, but I think at this point, we've all said we don't agree with that. I mean, I'm not gonna, no one can come up there and say, I'm gonna draw a box that's the exact same size as the buildable area, and that's my house.
but
we've
to
seen
be
it
fair,
done.
that was the applicant's position. I asked
That's
that
the
question.
argument, but we've
Yeah.
all discussed that that's not reasonable.
And so,
opinion, so.
sort of the one other thought that I have is that if this lot were a typical RS60 lot and it was 60 feet wide, then, these trees would fall on the borders of the lot. And, the house would necessarily have to fall in between the trees, right? Like, I don't know that we would have quite, the conundrum that we have here,
Well,
which is.
that's
Do a
not
couple-
necessarily
do a
true,
couple
because if you look at the canopy and the root zone, if you had two lots, for example, which, again, we're getting a little bit off track there, but if we had two lots, the second lot is not buildable, because the canopy and the root zones impact it.
But I think then, like, I think maybe you suggested before, a different variance would come to us, like, let's reduce, a setback,
Well,
rather than
and that's the
for the
issue that I
grant tree.
think can be raised, is there are setbacks here, even within the plans the two plans that we got, that look like they could at least save the elm. Again, as much as I hate, the oak would be the better one to preserve, because as you pointed out, oaks live longer than elms. But I don't see a basis. I'm not gonna be convinced that there's a basis to take down the elm. I'm leaning toward saying that I can approve removal of the oak. And so if there's a motion to split those two, and say one tree comes down, I think I'd support that, as much as I hate to see the oak come down.
I wouldn't support it till I saw some better alternative, architecture.
Right. So do we have maybe we bifurcate this and make one motion, and see where that takes us?
All right, I'll give it a shot. Okay. Ms. Johnson-Velez, before I start this, if I identify in the motion a tree by species and size, is that sufficient?
I would think so, because they're,
Because there's two
Located in
different
different-
species
right,
trees
and
that
one
are
is- right.
issued.
right.
Okay. All right. I move that a variance request for case VRB 23-34 for property located at 2912 West Bay Vista Avenue for the removal of a 39-inch southern live oak be granted as depicted on the site plan presented for the public hearing for the removal of that grand tree, based upon the petitioner meeting the burden of proof that the trees would be rendered hazardous by the proposed construction that cannot reasonably be reconfigured when considering the factors set forth in section 27-284.2.5 sub F in the city code for grand tree removal, specifically that the evidence provided in the record and at this public hearing showed that the buildable area of the lot is significantly impacted by by the canopy, the significant limbs, and the root zone of the live oak, and that reasonable reconfiguration or adjustment of the setbacks would be insufficient to preserve this tree.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor of the approval, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay.
All right, let me do the second one, just so we have it. I move that the variance request for case VRB 23-34, located at 2912 West Bay Vista Avenue, to remove a 42-inch American elm, be denied due to the failure of the petitioner to meet the burden of proof that the tree would be rendered hazardous by the proposed construction. It cannot be reasonably reconfigured when considering the factors set forth in 27-284-25 sub F, the city code for the grand tree removal, specifically that the testimony provided did not establish that the canopy and root zone of the elm would be impacted by a reasonable reconfiguration of the proposed structure.
I'll second.
All those in favor of the denial, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. So your application was approved for removal of the grand tree, the front of the lot, and denied with respect to removal of the elm.
Thank you.
Okay, yep, we're going to take a quick 5-minute recess.
This is, the property owner is Diane Reese, This is zone PDA, Plan Development Alternative. The variance request before the board is to reduce the rear yard setback from 20 feet to 10 feet for solid roof screen enclosure. The code section in reference to section 27-138-7I that has the dimensional changes for individual lots within a larger development being considered or determined by the VRB, and section 27-290.5 screen enclosures with solid roofs shall comply with the yard requirements for principal structures in that district. This is a site plan that the applicant has provided showing us the subject property. It is an interior lot in the New Tampa Overlay District. It is oddly shaped, and in the orange highlights, you are seeing the area of work that would have the solid roof enclosure. In the south side, you see the setback as 33 feet, and in the north end, you see that setback as 10 feet, and that's where the request is coming in. This was reviewed by Natural Resources with the following comment: the screen area shall not encroach into the protective radii of protected trees on or off-site. At the time of construction, a tree survey will be required showing all trees within 20 feet of the construction area. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at stepheneister@tampagov.net. Urban Design reviewed and had no comments. We received no letter of objection or support for this variance request. These are pictures that the applicant has provided showing us that rear yard and the conditions that exist currently on the property. And more pictures showing the subject area and where the screened porch would be going in. In the determination of the variance request before you, the board shall consider section 27-80 for the approval or denial of a variance request, and I'll be available if you have any questions.
I have a question, sorry, for staff. On the site plan over that sketch, there was a small setback of 7 feet at the very north corner. Is that?
That portion doesn't have the solid roof. So
Oh, it doesn't have the, okay, I
so
see,
the
I
roof
see. It
cover-
was really
so
hard to
that part,
read.
Yeah, it would just be a
Okay.
screen enclosure.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Mhm.
You can state your name, address, confirm that you've been sworn. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Diane Reeves. Address is 8215 Whistling Pine Way, Tampa, Florida, and I have been sworn in. So thank you for visiting or allowing me to visit with you today and request this variance. So as you can see, I have a beautiful lot with lots of landscaping around the edges where the fencing is, but my lanai is very narrow, so it's not very functional. I'm requesting approval for variance for the extended roof so that I could extend just the small lanai area, not the whole enclosure area, just the small lanai area forward so that there's protection from rain and sun and insects. The rest of it is just gonna be like a screen pool cage, so I understand that that's not an issue. It's just the small roofing area that will be extended. Because my lot is oddly shaped and the way the house sits on it, the one part of the one corner that we're extending out right now currently has 19 feet to the fence, and the other side has 29 feet to the fence. So when we build out, it's going to be on a slant, and I believe if the contractor told me one corner will encroach by 1 foot as to the current variance, and the other will encroach, I think, by 9 feet or 11 feet. I apologize, I can't remember what he said, because of the way the property is angled. So I'm just respectfully requesting approval so that I can extend out the covered area on the small lanai.
Does that complete your presentation?
That's,
Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this application? Seeing none, any questions from the board?
When did you acquire this property?
I bought it it's 7 years ago.
Okay, and can I assume that the house was already built when you bought it?
Yes,
So it was like that when you got it?
yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? You have 5 minutes for rebuttal, should you wish to use it.
I have no rebuttal, thank you.
And I will close the public hearing and open it up for a motion or board discussion.
I'll make a motion.
Do
No,
it.
no discussion either? I move that the variance request for case VRB 23-30 for property located at 8215 Whistling Pine Way be granted as depicted on the site plan presented at the public hearing for a reduction of the rear yard setback from 20 feet to 10 feet for a solid roof screen enclosure based upon the applicant presenting competent and substantial evidence in the record and at this public hearing of an unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty when considering 5 hardship criteria set forth in section 2780 of the city code, specifically that this is a odd-shaped lot, polygonal, which grants this structure and these yard setback reconfigurations.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, your variance is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Madhu, second to last case of the night, I guess.
Maybe, perhaps less.
We're still opening the public
Yeah,
hearing
and we still
for
have to- we
comment on
still have to,
continuance, yeah.
Move it anyway, so.
The next case before the board is VRB 2333. This is addressed at 813 West Amelia Avenue. It is zone PD plan development. The property owner is Matthew Braces and the applicant is Mark Blanar. And the variance request before the board tonight is to reduce the rear yard setback from 3 feet to 2 feet and 3 inches for an air conditioning unit. And the code section in reference is section 27-138-7I that has the dimensional changes of individual lots within a larger development being determined by the VRB, and section 27-290.6 that has the setbacks for air conditioning as 11 feet for the corner, 3 feet on the side, and 3 feet on the rear. This is the approved site plan, PD site plan, rezoning site plan for this property. This is the parcel B, is the parcel in question. And on this approved site plan, per the rezoning, they had a setback, rear yard setback of about 4 feet, I think it was, 4 feet. This is the site plan that the applicant provided to us, showing us that air conditioning unit where it's currently located. And this is a blown up image showing those setbacks. The width of the air conditioning unit is 1 feet and 9 inches, and the setback is currently at 2 feet and 3 inches. This was reviewed by Natural Resources, Transportation, and Right-of-Way and found consistent. We received no letters of objection or support for this request. The applicant provided us with pictures showing that air conditioning unit as it currently exists. In the determination of the variance request before you, the board shall consider section 27-80 as the criteria for the approval or denial of the variance request, and staff will be available if you have any questions.
I do have a question, Ms. Madhu. So we've talked about these AC units before and variances related to them. The basis of the code on this is it, as I understand it, it's primarily, we don't want the air conditioning units to be too close to other properties because they're noisy, they need intake, things like that. Is that a correct understanding?
That
generally
is,
what the
that
code
is
is
part
about?
of it, yes.
Okay, and is this a corner lot?
It is facing an alley.
Okay,
It's an interior lot, but it is.
it faces
facing
the,
an alley.
and there's an alley, I see the alley, yes, okay. All right, that's all I had, thank you.
Is the applicant here? Call on up. Please state your name, address, and confirm that you've been sworn.
Hey, Dale, my name is Mark Blanar, address 813 West Amelia, Tampa, Florida, 33602, and I have been sworn. So we are requesting a reduction in the rear yard setback for the air conditioning unit. We're proposing to reduce the setback from the 3 foot to the 2 foot 3 inches. It's just based on where that small unit would fit on the north side of the property. As you can see in the photos, there's also an alleyway behind it, so there is, there's large amounts of space between us and the neighbor. And there's also a fence that would be shielding this unit as well. This is all related to an improvement project that we're doing on the property, putting in more livable square footage, so this AC unit was needed. And that's why it's put on the north side. If you put it on the other side or the side, it would be closer to the neighbors because the neighbors would be right there. So the alleyway gave us a little bit of a buffer zone. Obviously, we're 9 inches off of the City of Tampa standard of 3 feet. So that's why we're here to request that reduction.
All right, does that complete your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this application?
Hiding under the chairs.
Seeing
I don't see
none,
anybody.
any questions from the board?
I could ask a couple, but I'd just be prolonging.
All right, you have 5 minutes for rebuttal.
Don't need it.
Okay, close the public hearing and open it up for a motion or discussion.
You'll do it? All right.
All right. I move that the variance request for case VRB 23-33 for property located at 813 West Amelia Avenue be granted as depicted on the site plan presented at the public hearing for a reduction in the rear yard AC setback from 3 feet to 2 feet 3 inches based upon the applicant presenting competent and substantial evidence in the record and at this public hearing of an unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty when considering the 5 hardship criteria set forth in section 27-80 of the city code, specifically that this is a residence up against an alleyway, and the main purpose of the AC setbacks is for quality of life for neighbors. This was actually the best place on the property to place the AC to not disturb anyone. There was no neighborhood folks against it, and it does not affect the safety and welfare of the public.
You have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, your variance is approved 4-0.
Thank you, board.
All right, and then, Ms. Johnson-Velez, do we need to make a motion to continue the case? We ran into an issue a couple weeks ago where we did not have a public comment period for a continuance, but since the applicant doesn't appear to be here.
Well, and as far as we can tell, the applicant hasn't actually requested a continuance. They
Well,
just.
But don't think it
What
was
did they
said.
say in their
He
email?
had an intent to, he
Don't-
said he may.
Don't think it
Request
one
a
sort of as of right, one continuance.
Well, they already got a continuance.
Oh, they
because
did.
Moved it once.
Continued, yeah.
And that was requested.
Okay,
And that was
Yeah,
requested. So the board rules require that an applicant appear in support of their application, and if they don't, then can carry over to the next available agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if for some reason they don't appear, we would normally just bump it to the next one if there's room. Is there room in July?
Yeah, I think so.
Should we bump it
It says to the next
August?
available agenda, so it doesn't have to be the next one. It can
Right.
be, right,
Right.
so.
Okay, so,
I mean,
Is
is August
July
better?
already full?
I'll say July.
Okay, because he's probably gonna cancel it anyway. He's probably gonna withdraw it anyway.
Probably because he has stormwater issues on the property and he's trying to resolve those,
Okay.
because I think he's scared that that might impact the decision.
So, if you'd like, I'll make a motion.
all right, it would be the July 11th meeting.
Nice, thank you for that. I move that we continue,
Maybe carry over? Because I don't want it to get confused, I mean.
okay, I move that we carry over VRB 23-25 to the July 11th, 2023 Variance Review Board meeting at 5:30 PM. Due to the applicant not appearing and vaguely requesting a continuance.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, continued, and I will close this public hearing.
Hey, have we considered